Thank the member. Recognized member from New Westminster.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and it is a great honour to open debate today on behalf of the official opposition. I'd like to begin by thanking the wonderful people of New Westminster for the opportunity to speak for them and represent their issues and concerns in this House. And I'm also deeply honoured to be the official opposition spokesperson from Health and to have the opportunity to advocate on behalf of people right across British Columbia when it comes to improving health care in this province. I must confess, Honourable Speaker, that I have been eagerly anticipating a return to the legislature and a new throne speech and a budget, hoping that it would indeed be an opportunity to speak to those very real concerns that my constituents are dealing with and that people across this province want us to be speaking to. And then when I listened to the throne speech yesterday, I must say I was deeply, deeply disappointed. It was a throne speech that shows that this Premier is frankly out of touch with the reality for British Columbian families. A throne speech that shows that this government is out of gas and out of ideas. A throne speech that shows that this Premier and this government is missing in action, offering no solutions to the problems that people and families are facing every single day. And the sharp contrast between what's in this throne speech and what's happening in the lives of real people, real families across British Columbia is really quite shocking. Every single day, I hear from people who tell me how their families are falling further and further behind, that they're paying more, that their wages aren't keeping up, that their future is uncertain. And they say that everywhere they turn, they are being nickeled and dimed by this Liberal government. Medical services taxes have more than doubled under the BC Liberals. They're now at $144 for a family, which is a real hardship, Honourable Speaker, especially hitting those people who can afford to pay it the least. A regressive form of tax, if there ever was one. And the Liberal government even broke its own promise that medical services taxes would only rise in direct proportion to the increase in health spending. They broke that promise. Not only that, ICBC rates continue to rise. Hydro rates are on their way to an 80% hike. Ferry fares have doubled on some routes. Even camping fees have gone up. The cost of childcare for families is already way out of control. And at the same time, real wages in British Columbia have fallen. And it is simply astounding, Honourable Speaker, that there is nothing, zero, in this throne speech that reflects that reality. Not one word. Is the Premier not listening, or does she simply not care? It certainly does say a whole lot about this Premier's priorities, that while families are paying more and people's wages aren't keeping up, the Premier has chosen to give a $230 million tax break to the richest 2% of income earners in British Columbia. I don't see this government giving the same kind of help to people who are struggling to make ends meet. In fact, everything just keeps getting more and more expensive for middle-class families. And I can't tell you, Honourable Speaker, how many parents say to me in my community every day how concerned they are that their sons and daughters are going to be the first generation that is worse off than they themselves are. But it doesn't have to be that way, Honourable Speaker. We can do better. We must do better. We have to do better. But this throne speech does not point us in that direction. We have so much potential in this province. British Columbians work so hard every single day, no matter where it is they work. We have a wealth of natural resources. We have important new sectors of the economy developing. We enjoy a strategic location for global trade. And yet so many British Columbians are living paycheck to paycheck. We have such enormous potential, but it is being squandered by this Premier and by this government. The Premier bet big on liquefied natural gas, and we are all paying the price for her having neglected the other sectors of the economy. Forestry, technology, mining, tourism, the green economy, small business, agriculture. Token references to these other vital sectors in a throne speech just doesn't cut it. The fact is, the Premier put all of her economic eggs in one basket, liquefied natural gas, and that basket is still sitting empty. You just can't take this Premier at her word anymore, and yet this throne speech carries on with the same empty promises about an LNG industry that the Premier says is the central preoccupation of her government. But so far, all we've seen are promises of jobs for temporary foreign workers, not workers, I might add, with a path to citizenship, like my parents had and many others before me have had, but temporary foreign workers who remain here strictly at the company's beck and call. And while this Premier placed a risky bet on LNG, and while she's been preoccupied with her friends at the top, she's neglected everything else, Honorable Speaker, like public education. Did we hear anything in this throne speech about investing in public education in order to improve classroom learning? The answer is no. For years now, parents and educators have been speaking out about the need to invest in our children's education for their sake and for the sake of the future of this province. That's what we heard from parents all through the education dispute. That's what the Finance Committee heard over and over and over again. That's what I hear every day as an MLA. I received more emails and phone calls and letters on the issue of investing in public education than on any other issue since I've been elected. And as one parent said to me recently, we spend $1,000 per student less than the average Canadian province on education. Can we really afford to not even be average? The Premier obviously thinks we can, because essentially all we got from the throne speech on public education was this Premier bragging about labor peace. But when it comes to public education for our kids, we have a Premier who just doesn't listen, or she just doesn't care. And what about transit and transportation, an issue near and dear to my community, which is at the crossroads of the Lower Mainland? 500,000 vehicle trips pass through every day without stopping. Well, because the Premier said there was going to be a referendum, we're going to have a referendum. That's what passes for leadership on this issue. We're going to let people vote. We didn't vote on whether we were going to have the Sea to Sky Highway. We didn't vote on the Port Mann Bridge or the Golden Ears or the Massey Tunnel. This throne speech was an opportunity for the Premier to lead on a vital issue of transportation and public transit, to say yes to transportation and public transit, to say yes also. This Liberal government made a mess of Translink when we took away accountability and democratic control, and we're going to fix that. And it was also an opportunity for her to say that if voters vote yes in the upcoming referendum, that the provincial government will also step up to the plate and commit its 1/3 of the funding and go to bat to get funding from the federal government too. But instead, we got a complete failure of leadership from this Premier. Let me turn now to healthcare. Healthcare. 2 words in the entire throne speech. Healthcare, stated once. That's it. 42% of the provincial budget, and it merited 2 words. I kept thinking there were more paragraphs to come, but no. Several paragraphs on liquor, not a single sentence on healthcare, a sure sign of a government that's out of gas and out of ideas, not listening, or maybe just not caring. Because if the Premier were listening, she would be hearing the same stories that I hear every day and that people on both sides of this House surely hear. Uncertainty about whether health care is going to be there for ourselves and our families when we need it. And if the Premier isn't hearing those concerns, maybe she should spend some of those days when she doesn't come to this House out there visiting some hospitals in order to find out what's really happening, because hallway medicine is the order of the day. And sadly, there are an awful lot of hospitals to choose from. like Royal Columbian Hospital in New Westminster. What's happening right now as we speak, a 68-year-old man who was admitted several weeks ago for major surgery. He thought he might have to have his foot amputated. Luckily, he didn't. This man has been on a stretcher for more than 3 weeks, Honorable Speaker. We can do better. We must do better. Hallway medicine is nothing new in my community, and sadly, it's nothing new across the province. And what does the government say? What is their response? Be patient. Fraser Health, they say, we did a top-level review. We're hoping to find ways to be more efficient. Be patient. Small comfort for that man who's been lying in a hallway for 3 weeks now. The Premier could also visit Surrey Memorial Hospital, where there's a new emergency room opened, $500 million, still overflowing. Some days 300, some days 500. And again, people stacked up in hospital hallways. What's the government's response? We didn't anticipate volumes this high. Or, it's flu season, be patient. How could the government not anticipate a spike in volume with a spanking new emergency room? And as for flu season, it's completely predictable. It happens every year. So we have a brand new emergency room, severely short-staffed, and the same old hallway medicine. Same story is happening as we speak in Prince George at the University Hospital of Northern British Columbia, and the story goes on in one community after another. We also didn't hear anything in this throne speech about deepening concerns about wait lists, whether it's MRIs, wait times for surgery, or even for cancer treatment. And we certainly heard those concerns raised in the fall about the BC Cancer Agency. We heard them from oncologists. We heard them from research scientists. We heard them from former CEOs. We heard them in this House on many occasions. And this would have been an opportunity for the Premier to say, to acknowledge, yes, we once led the world. We were on the leading edge of cancer cure and cancer treatment. But we've fallen behind. Our wait lists for cancer treatment are getting longer. To set out a bold vision to make sure that we restored that world-leading role for the sake of those of our loved ones who have cancer now or who will in the future. They deserve much better, and we didn't hear anything about that in this throne speech. Throne speeches are about a time to set out lofty goals, brand new slogans, I understand, like GP for me. A general practitioner for every British Columbian by 2015. Not a word about that in this throne speech, and no wonder, because right across the province, the story is the same. Hundreds of thousands of British Columbians who cannot find a family doctor, and they are worried, very worried. I hear about it in my community every day. I hear about it in Twitter. It's commonplace, a sign on a doctor's office, I'm retiring, this office is closing, there's no one to take my place. I visited Logan Lake a while ago. After hearing about the dire situation there, they'd been out without a regular doctor for 8 months. The only nurse practitioner in the clinic had a wait list of 6 weeks or more. And what a shock it was to see an emergency room, when you contrast it with what's happening elsewhere, an entire emergency room sitting empty, the beds empty, because there wasn't a doctor to tend with people who had emergency needs. So those patients had to travel to Kamloops in sometimes treacherous weather conditions in order to get to Royal Inland Hospital there. In order to see a family doctor, that was for an emergency, just to see a family doctor, sick people, including very ill seniors, had to get up early, travel to Kamloops, again, often in very difficult weather conditions on the Coquihalla in the middle of winter. And once they got to Kamloops, what happened there? Well, they faced the same situation as thousands of Kamloops residents already do. They lined up at the walk-in clinic. They took a number. Take a number. They had to compete with the Kamloops residents already in line outside of the walk-in clinic. And they told me, some of them, they prayed that their number would come up before the quota for the walk-in clinic was filled up for the day. Because if their number didn't come up by whenever that clinic was closing, and if they were taking 25 patients only that day, what did they have to do? They had to drive back home on the Coquihalla, travel back the next day, or if they were really, really gravely ill, where do they go? The emergency room, compounding already serious, serious problems at Royal Inland Hospital or wherever this same story plays out. The story is even worse in communities like Fort St. John and many other northern and rural parts of British Columbia. So I have to ask again, whatever happened to the government's promise of a GP for me? It was a great slogan, GP for every British Columbian who needs one by 2015. Well, it's now 2015, and somehow that slogan didn't make it back into the throne speech. No mention of nurse practitioners either. That was a great slogan too, NP for me, nurse practitioner for me. No mention of that in the throne speech. No mention of expanding the team-based care that urban and rural communities in British Columbia so desperately need. And you know, our government could look to other provinces to see how they are moving ahead by leaps and bounds with team-based care. Like Alberta, for instance, where the government has invested in several new family care clinics, and 9 more are scheduled to come on stream soon. Or in Ontario, where there are 140 community care centers. I visited one just a few weeks ago, with more of them coming on stream all the time in urban and rural and northern and First Nations communities. They have a wide range of healthcare providers. They have family doctors, they have nurse practitioners, they have public health nurses, they have dietitians, they have social workers, the appropriate care provider for what the patient needs. And you know what, Honorable Speaker? We talk a lot about outcomes, and outcomes are critically important. Well, here's an outcome that our government should learn from. 22% fewer emergency room visits in Ontario by patients of team-based community health centers. So if this government wants to look for solutions, they're there, Honorable Speaker. It's an excellent model, tried and true, serving urban and rural and northern and First Nations communities. And yet, no vision like that for expanding team-based care to take pressure off our emergency rooms, pressure off our more costly acute care hospitals, and in fact, as we know, and as we have debated in this House, this government shut down several community health centers in primary care in Vancouver in the last year. I mention rural health because these community health centers serve rural and northern communities extremely well when they're in place. There was not one single word about rural health in this throne speech. Not one single word about mental health either. At a time when 1 in 3 calls to police, and this happens across BC, 1 in 3 calls to police stations are about mental health issues. When our emergency rooms are full of people with mental illnesses, when that's absolutely the last place in the world where they should be, but there are no proper services in the community. There's not a word, not one word in this throne speech about mental health. Does the Premier have any idea what's happening out there? Is she listening? Or is it that she just doesn't care? And then let me speak also about seniors' care. Perhaps the most heartbreaking stories of all is what's happening with care for our seniors. Family after family expresses to me their uncertainty about seniors' care, whether it's going to be there for their parents who need it now, or whether it's going to be there for themselves in the future when they need it. Last week, I heard a story from a home support worker that made me want to cry. This community health worker had 5 clients to visit in their homes in a 6-hour period, and that included her travel time. Needless to say, and against everything that this care worker believes in, everything she wants to do, is trained to do, is passionate about doing, she's essentially put into an assembly line situation, trying to bathe people, to feed them, to assist clients, mainly frail elderly patients, assist them with toileting, and then rush on to see her next frail elderly client. And this is the heartbreaking story she told a group of people assembled at a seniors conference, speaking to the seniors advocate about what's happening in seniors care. She told the story of seeing one of her regular clients, an elderly woman. This woman didn't want a bath. She didn't want to eat. She told her she just wanted to die. And yet, for this care worker, comforting this woman in her hour of fear and loneliness, taking the time to sit and to hold this woman's hand, well, that's not something that a care support worker is supposed to do. She didn't have time in her schedule to do that. This is unacceptable, Honorable Speaker. These seniors built this province and built this country. They deserve the right to live out their last days with dignity and respect, and they can't get the support they need in their own homes. In my own community, an elderly woman contacted my community office recently for help. She has MS, a deteriorating condition, and she desperately needs and wants more home support hours than she's able to get, not only for feeding and bathing and assisting her with toileting at different times of the day, but also support so that she can get some exercise, so that she can maybe rebuild a little bit, minimally, a little bit of her strength, so she can have a bit better quality of life and maybe be able to be independent in her home just a little bit longer. I think she deserves that, Honorable Speaker, but she can't get it. We can do better. We must do better. Our seniors deserve better. And in residential care, we hear the same heartbreaking stories. It's rush, 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 little time for caring. Not enough time to attend to the residents' physical needs, their medical needs, much less their emotional needs, their need for social support, their loneliness, their isolation, their fear. And care aides are often told that it's just not part of the job. And if they're not told that, well, they still just don't have the time to be able to provide that care. And then, Honorable Speaker, there is the devastating impact of contract flipping in residential care. This is a familiar story since the days when this Liberal government introduced Bill 29, the case that went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, to say that breaking contracts was about violation of fundamental charter rights and freedoms. However, there's a little piece that remains, and that's one that allows workplaces like residential care facilities for the owner to flip a contract, the contractor to be replaced by another contractor. And that story is being repeated time and time again. We hear it every month. We hear it many times a year. It's a disgrace, Honorable Speaker, and something should be done about it, and this Premier could have done something in this throne speech. And it's happening as we speak, Honorable Speaker. Pink slips being given to care providers at the Inglewood Care Centre in North Vancouver. And this is a practice that doesn't just hurt the workers who have dedicated their lives to caring for our vulnerable seniors. It tears the care providers away from those vulnerable seniors, and they are the people who are often closest to them in their lives, dealing with their most intimate care needs, seeing them more often than their blood family members. At this particular facility, it's been the 6th flip of a contract since Bill 29 came in back in 2002. 6th time the contract has been flipped. It needs to change, Honorable Speaker. This Premier, this government should step up to the plate and take care of this disgrace. Let me conclude, Honorable Speaker, by saying, as I did at the outset, what an honor it is to represent the people of New Westminster, and what an honor it is to advocate for better health care for British Columbians from one corner of the province to the other. And I have to say that The most moving and memorable day in my time as official opposition spokesperson for health came last Saturday when I had the opportunity to join the Pediatric Cancer Survivorship Society to celebrate their hard-won victory in finally getting a specialized program to deal with childhood cancer survivors who are dealing with often horrifying late effects of the treatment they received as children. It was an honor to be by their side to celebrate. It was an honor to stand by their side and to advocate for them in this House. And I say today that their struggles are far from over, and we will continue to stand by their sides. And let me finally say that while this throne speech, on every front, ignores the real concerns of families right across British Columbia, the people of New Westminster, the people of British Columbia can count on the official opposition to fight for them every single day of the year, day in, day out, 365 days of the year. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I'm honored to have been able to open debate on behalf of the official opposition.